Welcome back to Happy Hour Econ, where a comedian and an economist walk into a bar. I'm Lou Perez, the comedian.
I'm Phil Magnus, the economist.
I've been hearing that we don't spend enough on education in the United States, which is surprising to me because when I look at the taxes that I pay, it seems like most of it, my local taxes, goes towards the school, towards the educational system there. Maybe that's just me, Phil. I don't know. Do we spend enough on education in the United States?
Well, that's the claim that's always made is that, we need to give more money to our teachers or more money to our universities. So, education spending in total is both lower and higher education. And both are massive public resource gobblers. They're like multi-billion dollar industries, if they were considered that are operating basically as public bureaucracies.
So how much are we spending on education per pupil, I guess, when it comes to public schools or government schools, as I prefer to call them?
Yeah, so according to the Census Bureau, it's about $17,000 per pupil in the K through 12 system every year, basically.
So I've heard New York, for example, they spend considerably more than that, something like over, I think, $40K a pupil. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I'm just imagining, if I was, say, putting together a system of education for my own kids and someone was giving me $40,000 a year, I'd probably be pocketing quite a bit of that. How much money is necessary to educate a child?
Well, we actually have economic theory that explains this pretty well. There's a concept from public choice economics that's referred to as the budget maximizing bureaucrat. And these are people that are not in marketplace situations. In other words, like they're not in a private company that faces competitive pressures to, keep their management of the company in line and make sure that it's not wasteful. Instead, public sector bureaucracies, they get their money from the taxpayers, and there's no real incentive to save on that money. You don't return the money to the taxpayers if it's unspent at the end of the year. Imagine that type of a concept. Rather, what bureaucrats do in public settings, if they have a fixed budget, they have a couple different motives or incentives for what they do. One of those motives is to get an even bigger budget next year. And how do you get a bigger budget next year? Well, you spend everything that you were given this year, and then you go back to the legislature or the local school board, local school district, the city, depends on whoever's your main source of funding, and you tell them, well, I didn't have enough money last year to do everything that I wanted to do because I spent it all, as you can obviously see on this budget I've turned in. Can you give me even more? But what does this do in terms of the perverse incentives that it creates? Well, you're at the end of your budget year, and you know that you have to submit your numbers for the next year, your request for the next year, and there's still money in your account. Then suddenly the school buys a new coffee machine in the teacher's lounge, or maybe it upgrades the furniture, or maybe it gives a new paint job to the building, or uses some of that money to hire an assistant to one of the staffers to take off some of their workload. So there's an accretion that develops over time from this budget maximizing behavior to spend everything that you're allocated so you can request for more. And then when you haven't spent everything you were allocated at the end of the year, find things to spend it on, because otherwise the granting authority will look at you and say, well, wait a minute, we gave you too much, so we're going to cut it back.
I was in graduate school and I taught undergrad for a couple of semesters. And with that job comes a very tiny budget.
Right.
Say it's like $100 or something like that. I was told basically spend the $100. And I didn't need to spend the $100, but I found ways of spending the $100 and making it just tangentially connected to the class. Like one of the classes I think was a creative writing class. I bought an album from the band Tool that I really wanted to listen to. And I think maybe I played like a track in class. And Tool is a very creative band. For anybody out there who's a creative writer, you might often write with music in the background. I've written with Tool in the background. Ergo, that was a reasonable expense. I'm not proud of it. I'm not giving back the money or the Tool album. I think enough time has passed. But when the incentive is there just to get rid of it, you will get rid of it.
That's exactly it. And I mean, I experienced this all over the place when I taught higher education as well. And I won't name names. I'm not going to say the institutions. I taught at many. But, there were times when someone in the department would come to me and say, hey, well, we have this budget line. There's about $500 left in it to give a presentation on XYZ. Can you go find a conference to give that presentation at? that I otherwise would not have gone to, just because they wanted to make sure the budget was spent. And you compare this to the private sector. Imagine if you're working in a company that their budget line is reportable to shareholders or reportable to the owner of the company or something like that. Well, that person or the party that represents them has an interest in actually making sure that you are not overspending. If you went to your boss in the private sector and say, hey, we budgeted $10,000 for this initiative last year, but I only needed about $8,000. Turns out I got everything I needed done and met my goals with $8,000. There were $2,000 left over. And, I just decided I was going to go take a real estate seminar in Hawaii. Or I decided that, my desk was getting a little shabby, so I bought myself a big fancy new one that's made out of mahogany or something. Your boss would look at you and go, yeah, you're wasting company resources. You get fired. If you do that in the public sector, if you're an Edu-crat, they come back to you and say, good, you spent your entire budget this year. Now we can up it by 10 or 15% and request even more next year.
I like that word, Edu-crat. I think it's important to separate Edu-crats from educators because you'll often hear stories about teachers who have to dig into their own pockets to buy school supplies.
Absolutely.
And it is interesting to see as the balance sheet has gotten so bloated where the growth is. There are more Edu-crats playing in the system now than there are actually teachers.
Yes, yeah. And this is unambiguous in both lower and higher education. The stats in lower education, they're all aggregated from 50 different states and a gazillion different school districts, so it's harder to track on that case by case, but the trend has been upward, and it comes from a couple of different sources. But I point to higher education because it's much more clear where you can actually see it. Sometime in the past, about 15 years, the number of administrators and mid-level bureaucrats that work in the U.S. university system surpassed the actual number of professors that are teaching classes, which is it's pretty astounding because, what's the purpose of having a university? What's to teach people? And that's the main mission there, that and maybe football, is to teach students. And yet you have more people working in the Office of Diversity, Student Services, and Parking Lot Management in aggregate than actual people that are teaching in the classroom. And then in lower ed, it's a similar pattern that's played out. There are all these auxiliary offices that are attached onto schools. So you have streams and streams of student services and guidance counselors and extracurricular activity. Some of that's perfectly fine. Some of that's perfectly understandable. But the growth has been exponential in that area. And a lot of it comes about from maximizing budgetary bureaucracy. Now, what are the major motives for this? So one, you can say, okay, I didn't spend all my money last year. Let's hire a new assistant. So you got that driving it on one side. That's kind of like the employees demanding it. But there's another factor in it, and that is state, local, and federal governments often put mandates on public institutions, both K through 12 and higher ed, on what they have to do and what they have to report. You have to have like a campus crime report that has to be delivered to the government if you're a college or a university. There may be good reasons to report this, but it's a mandate that comes from above. There are other things the district may tell you. You have to spend X number of dollars on such and such extracurricular programs, and you need people to run that. So when you're getting mandates from somewhere in the government above to do all these extra things that are in addition to teaching, plus you have a budgetary incentive to overspend so you could get more allocated to you next year. It's like both the supplier of the budget itself is mandating you to do things, and then the people that are working in there have a higher demand for resources, so you overspend. What do? You justify a new hire based on, I need this for regulatory compliance from above.
As spending has gone up, what has happened to student achievement, graduation rates? I mean, how are students competing on the international level?
Nosedived quite a bit. And, there's a lot of diversity in outcomes across school districts. There are some school districts that are very, very top notch. They consistently graduate students that go on to high-placed, high-rigor academic programs and jobs. Then there are school districts that have basically been dysfunctional for decades. So there's quite a bit of variation district by district. But one thing they all have in common is that there's more and more money seems to be dumped into them. And yet the outcomes are not getting better. You may remember about 20 years ago, George W. Bush, he pushed this whole notion of no child left behind, and it was a mechanism to try to steer public education toward better outcomes-based metrics and funding. Well, they did that for a little while, and then in the Obama years, they dramatically scaled back the penalty side of it, and yet the money kept flowing. It's kind of the situation. So there's no real incentive to actually do a measure on their performance and outcome side. And you see this in higher education as well. In particular, there's this whole subset of higher education we refer to as the general education classes. That's the thing that you have to take to graduate, whether you major in that or not. You have to go in there and get your poetry credit, even if you're an engineering student. Why? Because it's on the checklist that you have to get for your degree. Well, a lot of these classes are concentrated in what we would call critical thinking skills, reading, writing, humanities, analysis, stuff like that. And that's how they're justified. It's like, well, we want the engineer to also have good critical thinking and be able to write and be able to do these basic educated functions. Well, there's been pretty exhaustive studying of these gen eds and what they deliver, what like our students emerging from the first year and a half to 2 years of taking all these mandatory courses and writing composition and poetry and things like that. Are they emerging as better writers or better poets? And the answer is overwhelmingly no. They have test data that looks at the student outcomes when they arrive on their first day of freshman year, and then they test them again with the same type of questions at the end of their sophomore year when they finished supposedly all these critical thinking classes. And it turns out there's no change. There's no difference. They aren't getting any better at the things they're supposedly skilled in, and yet they've spent tens of thousands of dollars in tuition money, often subsidized by the government, to take these classes.
A few stories that have come out, one involving high school, the other involving college, and I'll start with the college one. So in the New York Post, a professor writes, "I teach mathematics at UC Berkeley. 3 days a week, I stand in front of lecture halls with 500 to 1,400 students. By the second week of the semester, I already know who is in trouble. Some students are 5 to 8 years behind in mathematics." Yeah. And that's college students.
Right. It's they're supposed to be in there at a baseline. And I've read similar stories. I think there was one about a statistics professor that said, I have to teach my kids that are coming in here basic fractions that they should have learned in like 6th grade or something.
I went to NYU, and one of the classes that I had to take was quantitative reasoning. And it was a mathematics class. And I did really well in the class. I was kind of amazed at how easy it was for a college class. In high school, I did really well in pre-calculus, but then calculus happened, and and that just went somewhere where God bless all you guys who are awesome at calculus. So I was kind of amazed at just how rudimentary the mathematics were as a requirement at NYU.
Yeah, which is a top university.
I feel like I'm in a different universe where kids are entering their freshman years unable to do the basics of mathematics.
And it's getting worse because you have to overlay this. What do we have traveling through the pipeline of soon-to-be college students? It's people who had 1 to 2 years of their K through 12 education disrupted because of COVID. They were shut down. They were kicked out of their schools and had to dial into the Zoom class. And I think we're seeing some statistical evidence that that's even worse than a already severe learning outcomes problem that had been moving through the educational system. So, and there are actually historical examples of this type of thing. When kids are kept out of the classroom for long periods of time, you have generational problems that play out through that cohort, basically not meeting learning outcomes. So there's a real infamous case that in the 1950s, after Brown versus Board of Education, some of the segregated states that had Jim Crow in place, rather than abide by the decision, they tried to shut down their public school systems for a couple of years. And the people that got harmed by that the most were the students, white and black. And there are studies that look at students in that district or that county that shut down its school district for a year or two because of all this ridiculous segregationism, lagged behind in educational outcomes vis-a-vis their peers in other parts of the country for, like, you can follow it for a decade or more afterward. And I think we've seen a nationwide experiment with a similar effect of shutting down schools, trying to do things online and through Zoom, and at a time when educational outcomes are already not great, and yet what's the school district do? Well, they get to say, oh, we've moved online. Give us more budget to pay for more Zoom licenses and hire computer technicians or something like that.
I remember during the lockdowns when so many kids were trapped at home having to take these virtual classes, and looking at that and looking at the budget in education and saying, well, can an argument be made that if all these kids are just logging in, then okay, who's the top math teacher in the country?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody can log into that person's lecture.
One person.
There was a story that came out recently that was really, really heartbreaking to watch a video of an educator. He put a video out there and he broke down in tears after realizing that his students couldn't read or write.
Yeah.
Juniors and seniors in high school, and they couldn't do basic
life skill.
And they're graduating. And some of them are going to college, which just doesn't make any sense to me. Some will just make the excuse, well, we need more money to be thrown at the problem rather than addressing the problem.
Exactly. Well, yeah, it turns out that both lower and higher education, for lack of a better word, they're a jobs program for a bureaucracy. And when you become that, and your incentive is all about maximizing your budget and maximizing the number of people you can pay and perks of the job that they can have, then outcomes really don't matter as much. And I'm not saying that like teachers are bad teachers or are being are bad at their jobs. It's quite the contrary on that. There are many, many good teachers out there that are trying to do very noble tasks of educating the next generation. Their calling is there in the classroom for a good reason. But the incentive structure of the system that they're in generally undervalues that vis-a-vis bureaucracy and spending things.
What role do parents play? Because I'm somebody, I don't want to take any responsibility for my own failings, the failings of my children, or anything like that. But, I do wonder, how big of a role I can play. Just last night, my oldest, who's going to be starting first grade, and first grade was big for me. I remember my teacher, Miss Hossein. If you're out there, I'm Luis Perez, Little Louie, if you're a listener. And she was delightful, and I, absolutely loved her. But my son was, kind of... he's anxious and he was a little upset because one, he was afraid that he wouldn't know anybody in his class. And the other thing was he was upset because he doesn't know how to read yet. And, I had to explain to him, like, one, he's a great kid, makes friends very easily. And to explain, the role of you going to school is to learn to read that, and it's a skill that you're going to get better and better at. And we're going to work together and make it happen. And there's the possibility, for a lot of parents out there with kids. One, I don't know how social their kids are to be able to, integrate and have a good time and, be social and all that. But then two, if they are going to be learning the basic skills of reading sometime before high school, before they start
read before high school,
read before high school, hopefully before, their doctoral programs, they're able to read.
Yeah. And I think this gets kind of really to the heart of it. What can a parent do in an educational situation? And there's actually an economic theory behind this. So there's a economics/political science theorist writer by the name of Albert Hirschman, who developed what's referred to as the theory of exit versus voice. And he's basically asking the question is, so you're in a situation and you want to improve the quality of what's being offered from the product that you're consuming. Well, think of it if you're a soft drink manufacturer versus a soft drink consumer. If the manufacturer starts putting out poor flavored soft drinks, the quality control is not there, they just taste bad, what do consumers do? They switch to a different brand. They exit. And that becomes a signal to the soft drink manufacturer, hey, there's something wrong with your product line, fix it, or you go out of business. Well, public education is a bit different because you don't really have much in the way of choices. If you're a consumer of the school system, the school you go to is the one that your neighborhood is located next to, where you're zoned and directed to go there. So what are your options in the school system if you want to improve the quality as a parent? You have something called voice, and that is to call the principal, call the teacher, go to the PTA meeting, all the different things that the more active parents do. And, they go in there and why isn't little Johnny or little Susie learning to read? Why don't they know their fractions by this level? Well, it's the squeaky wheel exercise of voice will hopefully improve the quality. But there's another complication on this because there's really not a direct consumer relationship of an exit option. Voice is the only tool, but voice is very disproportionately exercised. Sometimes you have parents that are really, really invested in their kids. They're making sure that they get in the best classes and that the outcomes are met. They're the ones that are most likely to exercise that voice. But what about the parent who just sees K through 12 education as their substitute to a babysitting service? They drop their kid off in the morning, go to work, and then they don't have to worry about them, and then they come home. And it's like, oh, fine, I dropped my kid off at a school. The school took care of him. He was their problem for the day. And there are, unfortunately, parents that approach it that way. Those parents do not exercise voice. They don't care one way or the other if little Johnny or little Susie comes home and doesn't know how to read by ninth grade.
Obviously, the way things are going, you go to grammar school, then high school, then college, or at least that's the way that it's been.
Yeah.
When it does come to college and just looking at the cost of college, how it's gone up, I did work recently on a documentary with a fellow NYU alum. And when I went to NYU, it was about $20,000 a year. Nowadays, I think it's running pretty close to $100K, and it's going to be even more than that if you're staying on campus and
doing all the in the nice dorm and the meal plans. And
I was fortunate. I got an academic scholarship, so I was able to leave college without any debt. I can't imagine having studied what I studied and having spent so much time not studying when I was supposed to be studying and partying in New York City, leaving with $250,000 in debt or more and starting my life with that much debt. What impact does that have on higher education, people choosing whether or not to go in the first place? What are we looking at there?
Well, it's astronomical. Now, the one difference between higher education and K through 12 is there's a lot more choice. And that choice comes on two different margins, and they're both economic. One is what type of institution do you go to? Do you go to the elite, private, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Ivy League type of a school where you are paying $100,000 a year unless you get a scholarship, of which there's very slim money available, but you're probably going to have to take out some debt if you do that. Or you can go to the local community college, and it's heavily subsidized. Two, it's at a price point that's much more competitive because that's what they need to be for the community college. And it might be a different style of education, but you could be paying, a couple $100 per class. Maybe you're talking in the thousands per year, not hundreds of thousands per year. Then the second thing you have a choice on is, well, what do you major in? And if you show up and think, oh, I'm going to be an electrical engineer, this is a high paying career, it might make sense to take out a couple $100,000 in debt because you're going to go into a job, especially if you've gone through graduate school or some sort of advanced training that is making easily a six-figure starting salary. And there are several majors that fits into, a lot on the engineering side, business, finance, accounting, things like that. But what if you took out $100,000 in debt per year to get a degree in post-colonial studies?
You're going to spend a lot of time complaining about capitalism. I'll tell you that much.
A lot of time complaining about capitalism and, sit there and paying off your student loans for decades, or going to the government and asking the government to pay them off for you. And what if you go on to get an advanced degree? And there's just a huge gradient. So like the very lowest paying careers, and I think there are several indices that put this out every year. Like what are the majors that pay the lowest? And I think one at the bottom I always mention, because it does actually exist at some institutions, there's a degree in puppetry. It just doesn't pay all that well.
I should have taken that, actually, if I can go back.
The other end is like brain surgeon and really advanced engineering and things like that do pay very well.
Well, bring the two together. Phil, bring the two together. If your brain surgeon brings out a puppet in the middle of your surgery, just
there you go. Keeps you distracted while they're cutting and poking. But yeah, this gradient, the fact that it exists, it means that a lot of the financial decisions you make as a student are going to be impacted by later down the line based on the career that you choose and the major that you choose. And unfortunately, a lot of the incentives are aligned against this. You'll go to almost any college in the country. And when they're giving you the tour to try to recruit you to go there, it's not, well, arrive on the first day and declare that you're going to be an accounting major and focus all your courses on that and get your degree done and graduate and go into the world and have a job. It's, no, you can come here and you can spend the next 2 years discovering yourself and experimenting in all these different subject matters because they're all equal and they're all part of the university system. And if you discover you like puppetry, you can go be the best puppet master that you can be. If you discover you like engineering, you can go do that too. But it's all about selling the whole university as a lifestyle package. And plus, if you get here, you'll be in the nice dorm that has a Chipotle on the ground floor of it that you can get with your meal plan. And we also just installed the new campus rec center that has a lazy river and a rock climbing wall. And these are the perks that they actually sell us. And all these examples are real. I mentioned that I'm not making
lazy river.
Yes. A lazy river where, you're done with classes. You can go get on an inner tube and float around the circle in the campus rec center on that. These things are not free. They don't come out of the ether and just grant themselves on every institution. They have to be paid for. And part of the payment to maintain those comes from student fees. It comes from tuition. It comes from public funding that's given for capital campaigns. It comes from private sources to build things and put a name on it on your institution. But there's all sorts of money flowing in for things that are not at the educational core. And it's led to this both an accretion of bureaucracy and an accretion of perks and benefits and facilities around higher ed. And what does that do? Well, it drives up costs. And when you see this, where do the costs get paid or who bears them? It's either the students and their tuition for $100,000 a year to get the same thing. It used to be a fraction of that even 5, 10, 15 years ago. And it's from the taxpayers that are keeping these institutions alive through public funding, grants, subsidized loans, you name it.
What are some policy changes that you would enact if you had the power that would completely make the educational system functional and cheaper, et cetera?
Yes, on functionality, on the K through 12 side, a voucher system. This was Milton Friedman's proposal. And he actually had an interesting debate with the other fellow I mentioned, Albert Hirschman. Said, well, wait a minute. If you allow students to leave, to exit the school system, yes, that improves the quality of the school that they go to. But it also means who's left behind in the failing school. Well, there's no longer any voice to make it better. It's just the parents that think their perfect little angel can do no wrong, drop them off in the morning. He beats up the other kids. They pick them up at the end of the day, and the parents defend him to the principal. So you do have a bit of a trade-off there, but Friedman's going to come back and he'll say, well, wait a minute. The schools that are underperforming, that are losing students through a voucher mechanism, those are people voting with their feet, and that should be a signal to the district that runs it. Hey, you have a failing school right here. And maybe that school needs its administration cleaned out. Maybe that school should be shut down even, which no one likes to talk about that. But it's not like saying that we're going to exclude children from schools. That's the point of the voucher system is everyone can use it, no matter their income level or status or where they live, to go to a school of their choice and create some competition. So that's the K through 12 side. And then if I were to reform higher education, well, I think a couple of things. One is get government out of the subsidized student loan business. It's distorted all the signals of what you can do with a degree. It means that you can get a loan to go study post-colonial studies, which just basically ends up being a degree in Marxism, and then have no employability afterward. Or you could use it to get electrical engineering. The point here I'm making is that human capital dimensions of higher education are not all equal across the board. What you choose to major in matters. So ideally, I don't like government subsidizing student loans at all. But if we were to reform it, one thing that they could do is, you direct some of that money toward majors that actually pay. But if you want to go get your puppetry degrees, we're not saying you can't get a degree in puppetry, but you're going to pay for it yourself, not ask for the taxpayers to pay it.
Thank you for listening to the show. We hope that it has been an education for you, a free education. In exchange, all we ask is that you like us, share us, and if you're just joining us now, we have a ton of episodes that you need to listen to. This has been Happy Hour Econ. We'll see you next week.